But if you had enough people together who's all said, hey, on an individual level, we're going to voice our displeasure with Target by not doing business with them. This then maybe offers a kind of cautionary tale to other businesses. And hey, no company out there is too big to do whatever it is they want and to send whatever message it is that they want. Welcome to the Maven Parent Podcast, where we try to take the Christian worldview and add it to practical advice for families. And so this week's podcast, we want to talk about a couple of news items. One would be a personal news item for the Kunkel family, and then we also want to talk about some national news. So first, Erin, I'm going to throw this out to you because we had a little newsworthy happening in our own home where there was some crisis, some controversy, some gnashing of teeth, some hurt feelings, and on and on and on.
A visit to urgent care.
A visit to urgent care. And so could you just tell our audience what happened to your youngest child and why you were not watching him 24/7?
Well, we thought we'd share the story just in case there's a myth out there that we are perfect parents, all-star parents, and never make mistakes. But
we haven't heard that myth. We don't want to hear that myth. But I think the challenge is you're doing a parenting podcast where you're offering advice and wisdom, and we certainly never want to give off any kind of idea that we have it all together, because Erin certainly does not. And no, neither of us do, obviously. And so we thought this story might illustrate.
Well, it's just kind of I guess it was funny to us, not really to our 11-year-old. But anyway, he was playing football in the neighborhood with friends. Lots of boys in this neighborhood that we live in. So they were all out playing football at one of the boys in the front yard, one of the boys' house. Our son tackled the other kid, which I'm not sure if they were supposed to be playing tackle. No, he said he tackled him, but as they fell down, the kid fell on his foot.
Okay, but did he make the tackle? That, as a dad, that's what I want to know.
No, what I wanted to know was, were you supposed to be tackling, or were you guys playing flag football, which you normally play flag? I'm pretty sure he wasn't even supposed to tackle.
11-year-old, 12-year-old boys don't normally play flag. They play tackle when they have grass in front of them.
Well, here's a good example why maybe they should play flag. So anyway, so the kid falls on our son's foot, and it hurt really bad. I can't remember if he cried or not. But anyway, by the time he got home, he walked home and said he hurt his foot playing football and it hurt really bad. And so, I did do you want to put ice on it? Are you okay? And so he did put ice on it. Well, then the next day, he was complaining about it still a little bit. And when we were sitting down to eat dinner, and actually you were out of town, I accidentally kicked it under the table, kicked his foot. And
Wait, just to clarify, accidentally? You accidentally kicked him?
I tapped his foot. Okay. And so he reacted really like it really hurt him. And I barely, tapped his foot. And I said, "Oh, is your foot still hurting?" And he's like, "Yeah, Mom, I was saying it was hurting, And I was like, "Oh, I didn't realize it was still hurting. It seems like it's hurting you bad." And he said, "Yeah, if I bump it or anything, it hurts bad." So then we went and picked you up from the airport, and then
was that the next day or that?
No, that night. And then anyway, right before he went to bed, I said, "Jonah, let me see your foot." Oh, because he hit it again on something and reacted so much so that I thought, I wonder if he broke a bone, because this kid in particular has broken 4 bones, and this at different times. And this was that kind of reaction. So I said, let me look at your foot. He takes off his sock, and I was horrified to see black and yellow bruising. It's swollen. 2 toes are swollen. His foot is swollen.
Two toes were missing.
No, they were missing. I was like, oh my word. And I just, that was actually, so I had realized I had never actually looked at his foot when he injured it, and hadn't until that point. And then I realized, oh my gosh, it probably is broken. And here I've had for like 2 days, the kid's been walking around on it. So I called the doctors, and then they got us an appointment in the morning to go to quick urgent care thing. And so there we are in the doctor's appointment, and you have, everyone who comes in is like, hey buddy, what happened? And then the next question is always, now, when did this happen? And so it's kind of the humiliating mom dropping of the head, that it's like, 2 days ago, and we're just now coming here. So anyway, it was just one of those moments where I thought, wow, this is, I win the award for Mom of the Year for having him hobble around on this foot that I didn't even take the time to look at until more than 24 hours later. And it was, thankfully it wasn't broken, but the bone was bruised. And even when the doctor saw it, he was like, whoa, that looks bad and looks painful. And so just so you know, listeners, it was a shining mom moment for me, and very humbling.
And for dads, and I think most dads out there probably maybe they're, I don't know if they'd be more compassionate on you in these circumstances, because a lot of dads are thinking, well, hey, if there wasn't a bone sticking out of his leg, if he was still able to walk and at least get around or hobble, although I didn't think okay,
you were barely aware.
I'm about to admit something here. I was barely aware we had a 5th child. No, I wasn't aware that. I know he had heard it, but I didn't really see him hobbling around. There were times when he did seem like fairly normal. Yeah,
in my defense, he could walk on it. The bone that got hurt was actually at the top of the foot, so it didn't. If he had shoes on, it didn't really hurt him to walk.
Yeah.
So but it did make me feel kind of like a dad, actually, now that you're mentioning it. Because any dad I've told this story to, they're like, oh, yeah, well, how would you know? And I'm thinking, we're supposed to know. This is what mothers do.
We're supposed to know every single thing.
We intuitively know things. And
we're supposed to be able to feel the nerves, the pain that our kids feel.
The fact that I waited almost 2 days to take him in made me think, oh, gosh, am I acting like a dad? Is this poor child not having? Am I so tired now on kid number 5 that I've been to the doctor so many times?
Well, maybe it might
that
not
I'm
be
putting it off.
It may not be tired. It may just be apathy. Okay.
Maybe it's both.
But this is where I think a lot of dads are, hey, you can walk on it. Oh, you're good, kind of thing.
Yeah, any dads I've told the story, that's how they respond. And any mom I tell a story to, they're like, oh, it's okay. You can't be perfect.
Yeah. Or they say, oh, and this is why we wanted to share the story, but other moms have said, oh, gosh, I remember when I did that too. Mm-hmm. And I just got us thinking, like, hey, these kind of things where sometimes we feel like we blew it as parents. We messed that one up. Here, we thought, did we let our kid walk around for 2 or 3 days on a broken foot? It happens to the most diligent of parents. And I guess we want to share that so that, hey, you hear that more often, because we go around in a world of image and a world of social media that helps you construct online images or an online image and identity. It can just seem like, hey, other parents out there are so perfect They've got all their ducks in a row. They never, ever once let their kids down, or they never have an incident like this. I wouldn't even say this is letting our kid down, but sometimes you feel that way. And I think it's just good for us to remind one another that these kinds of things happen all the time in everyone's family, and it's okay.
Yeah. Yeah. You can't possibly be perfect. But it is funny how, sitting in that waiting room in the doctor's office, I'm thinking, gosh, I blew it. What if this kid, and you have those thoughts. I don't know if it is just as a mom, but you do have the thought that you should know what happened, even if you don't. And that sometimes waiting is actually good, because sometimes kids bounce back up and they're fine or whatever. So it does require some wisdom, but.
Yeah, and there's probably those stories that we could think about where he got hurt and we didn't go to the hospital and spend that time and money. And he was fine 2 days later. So there's those times, but we don't often think about those times. We think of all the times we quote unquote blew it.
Yeah.
And so we need to give ourselves grace and realize, there is no such thing as perfect parenting. You can't know everything. You and I are limited human beings. And so no matter what we do as parents, we always have to trust. We always have to trust the Lord with our kids and with our parenting, and admit the times when we blow it, give grace to one another, and give grace to ourselves. And so I just thought, hey, we had to start with a little personal headline here from the Kunkel family. And if I were to write the headline, I think I'd write, Mom ignores 11-year-old son's major injury, or something like that. So that was the headline. A second headline, and I mean, unless you're probably, I don't know, living under a rock or living in the forest or living in Nebraska.
Because even if you're not active on social media.
That was funny.
Oh,
you missed
you
that.
said living in the forest.
I said living in Nebraska. Did you miss that? Because I know you would laugh at that, and then you would feel bad.
Nebraska?
You'd feel bad for the Nebraska. See, I knew you must not have heard.
We
that.
love the people of Nebraska.
We do.
We've worked with several churches there. Well, we have Tim Stratton lives there. One of our field guides.
One of our field guides, Tim Stratton.
We love him.
He never listens to this podcast anyway, so we can make fun of Tim and his Nebraska.
We love the people I love the people of Nebraska.
Oh, I do too. I've been on farms in Nebraska.
There are a lot of farms, and thankfully, someone has to grow the food.
I was
that
in a
we
cornfield
eat
in Nebraska. No, actually they're kind of good salt of the earth people in Nebraska. But unless you are living off of social media, which is actually good. Although podcasting, I wonder, is podcasting under social media? Would that fall under social media? Because then if you're listening to this podcast, you are by definition not off of social media. Okay, nonetheless, and this is what you do when you have a philosophy degree. You try to think of all these fine-grained distinctions. But look, have you heard the news about Target? You probably have. Target has been in the news, and we're talking about Target, the
store.
The store. What kind of store would you call it? A department store? Do we even talk about department stores anymore? That's like old language. That's what our parents talked about.
Yes, no, Target is it's an essential store, right? Because during COVID, they didn't have to shut down. They were considered essential.
So it's Target.
Target is an essential store to our lives.
Okay, all right. It's been an essential part of your life for a long time. In fact, you used to, use other names for it that were kind of endearing to you. You used to call it Target.
Target. Well, I didn't come up with that, but yes. So yes, Target has been a big part of this family's economy.
Shopping habits. And I think we've used illustrations of a kid throwing a temper tantrum in Target, So, hey, we've been outed. We have shopped at Target. And then all of a sudden Target is now kind of in the headlines with all this controversy, and it had to do with Pride Month, which is not new.
No.
I mean, Target's been celebrating Pride Month for
many years. Yeah, and I think at least 10 years, if I'm not mistaken. I know I looked it up. And this year too, I haven't tracked it myself, but of course, June is what has been said to be Pride Month in America. And so that is usually, in the month of June. Target, it seems to the past couple years, has started even earlier, and they did this year as well. About mid-May, they bring out the Pride stuff, and it doesn't go away at the end of June too. I've noticed that in past years as well. So Pride Month becomes kind of summer, Pride summer, and so we've been aware of that. A lot of people, if you walk into Target during this time, the display is usually front and center of the store. You can't really walk into the store and not see it. And so they're in the news, though, because this year their Pride merchandise has been ramped up even more.
It seems like it. And even if it hasn't been ramped up, even if some of these things have been slowly added over the last couple of years to Target, it's gotten more press.
Yeah.
And it's kind of, and so there's been a raised level of awareness of all of these LGBTQ plus themed clothing, swimsuits, merchandise. I mean, even merchandise for your dogs or your pets, or it's kind of becoming ubiquitous, right? And this is what we've talked about over and over again. This is one of the ways that culture shapes us, and this is why we need to pay attention, because we're surrounded by a culture where now LGBTQ and Pride celebrations and all of this is just much more normal, much more prominent. It's all over the place, and it just seems to be, it's being presented as the norm. And so our kids are growing up in a world where, Pride is the norm, and celebrating Pride is the norm.
Well, and the stated purpose is to celebrate these things. So all the lifestyles that the acronym represents, it's to present it as normal. This is how we are as people, but also to celebrate that too.
Yeah. And Pride Month.
Right.
Be proud, right, of your LGBTQ plus.
But I think it has been ramped up this year in a couple in particular things. For one thing, now they carry chest binders for girls. And I think everyone pretty much knows what those are, but you girls strap them around their chest to flatten out their chest and give the appearance that they are actually have male chests and not female chests. And then the new bathing suits that have come out for the summer have tuck-friendly labels. So these are women and girl bathing suits, and then they have an insert for males to wear these and to tuck their genitalia so that they can appear to be women.
And you can, and we've seen videos on social media of parents or commentators or social media influencers who are going into Target, walking into their local Target and filming. And like you said, it's right up front, prominent displays, and you're talking about children's bathing suits. And it just seems like over time now, there's been an explosion of products that are targeting kids. And so that's what we've seen with these, tuck-friendly girls bathing suits. And the chest binders obviously are aimed at a younger demographic. And so there's been a lot of controversy over this. And so there have been people who have been calling for boycotts. There have been people who have said, hey, I'm not shopping at Target anymore. And there has certainly been an impact from this on Target's bottom line. And the last I heard, it was they've experienced losses of over $9 billion in value, right? And their stocks have lost value in this. And so there's been controversy, and of course all the pundits are debating this. And so what we wanted to do was spend a little bit of time thinking through this. And again, like we said, it's important to wade into some of these cultural controversies. Look, I know a lot of us out there, we're tired of it. And part of the reason I think we're tired of it, I think there's always been cultural controversy. This is, I think, the result of being in a 24/7 social media, technological, 24/7 news cycle type world that we live in. So we're just, this stuff, the controversy is blasted, right? What bleeds leads. So you get all the bad news up front in your, social media feeds. And you sometimes just think, I wish it could just all go away. I would love a break from all of this controversial stuff. But we as Christian parents have got to teach our kids about the reality of the world that we are living in, that we live in a broken world, and it's broken in all kinds of different ways, and it's broken very deeply, and then how to engage with that world. Right.
Yeah. Well, as you're talking, I'm thinking about the exhaustion part. And I think, conflict is exhausting.
Yeah.
And some people handle conflict better than others, but I think no matter what, it is exhausting. And so there's so many issues in the culture. And as parents, there's so many issues now that we have to think through and navigate. And what do we do about this? And what do we do about that? And so just another conflict. And this one, for a lot of us, hits home, because this is probably, if you're like me, you go to Target at least once a week. I mean, I'm just going to admit that.
Wait, what?
We have
I have got
we
to
have
take
a Target
look at our finances.
down the street from us. And as we've been talking about this issue in our home with our kids, which is why we thought we'd talk about it on the podcast, is because we do go there a lot. And it is, I love Target because I can go there and grab groceries. Well, this is what happened just, a couple weeks ago, where I go there with two of our kids, and I send the teenage daughter to go grab a couple things that she needs in the clothing section. I send our 11-year-old to the toy section to grab a birthday present for a friend. I go to the grocery section, grab a few things. And we get all those things in one place, and we were out of there in like 30 minutes.
And it's a reasonable price.
Oh, yeah. So this hits home, right? And if you're like a normal family, like I think we are, this kind of thing hits home. And so it's like, oh gosh, another conflict, another thing I have to think through. And it's exhausting.
Yeah. It is easier to walk through life kind of mindless or just trying to ignore those things.
It is, yeah.
But we are, as believers, we are to be in the world, but not of the world, okay?
And teaching our kids to do that too. We don't actually want our kid, like the temptation is, oh, let me just put my head down and go through life and not even, like a presidential election's coming up. Oh, great. Here we go again. Let's just put our head down and pretend. But we actually don't want our kids to be those kind of people.
Yeah.
We want our kids to be people whose heads are up, are seeing what's happening around them, and learning how to think through it. So we have to do it too. We have to wade into the conflict, even if it's just around our own kitchen table.
Yeah.
We have to do it because these are the kind of people we want our kids to be.
Yeah, and this is going to help our kids to, number one, resist the false ideas of the world, and to do what Paul says in 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verses 3-5, demolish the false ideas of the world. Okay, and not be captured. In Colossians 2:8, he talks about not being captured by empty philosophy, worldly philosophy, the ideas of the world. And so it helps them to resist the ideas of the world, to be able to refute those ideas. But then that's an important part of being salt and light in the culture. And so what you have here, and so this is where kind of a biblical worldview helps us to frame this for our kids, and it helps us to develop the proper expectations. Because if you have a Christian worldview, if your worldview is informed by Scripture, then you actually should have a healthy expectation of the conflict and of the controversy. And so, we often talk about these 4 chapters of human history, right? Starting in Genesis chapter 1, you have creation. And then Genesis chapter 3, which would be chapter 2 of the 4 chapters. I'm going to mix everyone up here.
Yes.
Okay, so creation, chapter 1. Chapter 2 is the fall, which is in Genesis chapter 3. And then chapter 3 of this larger biblical framework is redemption. And chapter 4 is restoration. So you have creation, fall, redemption, restoration, or recreation, or glorification. Some people will put different words on that, but the whole idea is that gives us a larger framework, a larger context in which to situate our lives and understand the world around us. And so when we focus on chapter 2, the fall, and we go through Scripture and we read things like Romans 3:23, right? For all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. Or I want to read actually John 3:19. These are the words of Jesus recorded in John's gospel. And this, I think, helps us to understand how dark the world can be, right? We have experienced some of the benefits of Christianity over the last 2,000 years in terms of human civilization and the common grace that we experience from God, but just how Christianity has given rise to Western civilization and many of the incredible things and advances, moral advances. And so we're kind of have I think Western culture has a little bit of a hangover on that. And so we get to benefit from some of the good moral views, but that seems to be unraveling around us. But when you study all of human history and you look at some of the incredible evil things that human beings do, you realize that what Jesus says in John 3:19 is really true. It's borne out in the world around us. And Jesus says this, he says, and this is the judgment. The light has come into the world, and people loved the darkness rather than the light because their deeds were evil. Now, I just want you to pause and reflect on that. Okay, so the light's come into the world. Well, everyone loves the light, right? Everyone's drawn to the light. And what Jesus says is that he says the opposite thing. People loved the darkness rather than the light. Of course, when he's talking about the light, he's talking about himself and the truth that he sheds on our world and our situation. And people, the response is people love the darkness rather than the light. And then here's the reason why. Because their deeds were evil. Because their deeds were evil. Now pause just for a second. And I'm just thinking out loud here. How often do we characterize our deeds or the deeds of those around us or the deeds of our culture as evil? Right? That we think that's strong language. And it is strong language, but it's accurate language. It's how Jesus captured this. Hey, there are deeds that are evil. And I think it's important to watch our language and how we talk about moral things. Because I've noticed kind of a shift over the last, 20 years or so, that when people will talk about things that really turn out to be evil, we won't use that kind of strong language. Mm-hmm. We'll say, oh, well, that's weird. Or, well, I wouldn't do that. But we
shy away.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. We shy away from declaring something to be evil because, that's judgmental. Mm-hmm. All right. But this is Jesus, the most loving man who's walked the face of this earth, calling human beings out for loving the darkness because their deeds are evil. And so this just gives us a picture, or I guess it helps set our expectations for what we see around us. And if we have these healthy expectations that, the days are dark sometimes, and there are a lot of people living in the darkness, human beings love evil. In fact, read Romans 1. Maybe read Romans 1 every day. Well, it might be depressing when you get to 18, verses 18 through 32, but it just shows this human beings in their rebellion, suppressing the truth and unrighteousness, and then this progression of sin, and then there's a kind of a list of sins at the end that you could look around and go, those seem to be coming, those sins are becoming more prominent in our day and age, it seems.
Yeah, and I think thinking about, or having clarity about what is the things that are actually evil does help in what we were talking about earlier, the conflict being exhausting and difficult. Because if you have clarity on what is right, then even if you have to go through conflict, it strengthens you to have that clarity of thought, which is why we have to think through the things that are happening in the culture, and we need scripture to help us to categorize things and give us wisdom on what to do and what to say and when to do things and when not to do things. But having clarity on the moral issues is what will help us to push through conflict and have it just, I think, a fortitude in it. That sometimes I feel exhausted. But then when you think about what we've talked about on this podcast, really the evil of telling a child that the way they were made is wrong and that they should mutilate their bodies in an attempt to become something that in actuality they can't.
Yeah.
And so it's this big lie, and there's all these lies in it.
And there's so many more lies. I mean, it has to do with identity, what your identity is. It has to do with teaching kids to hate their body, right? And then mutilating themselves, and denying reality, that there are, males and females.
It denies that we have a creator who had intention when he made us.
Yeah. It is a full on rebellion against God. In fact, Romans 8:7, and this is where I think what you said is so good. We need to be in Scripture to remind ourselves of these things. Romans 8:7, for the mind that is set on the flesh is hostile to God, for it does not submit to God's laws. Indeed, it cannot. There's another word, strong word. The mind that is set on the flesh is hostile to God. We need to realize that these ideas, so the way Scripture would categorize these kinds of ideas, these ideas come from minds that are set on the flesh. And therefore, this is hostility to God. And I think you're absolutely right, Erin, and you bringing it back to the Creator. There's all these consequences, all these lies in all of the gender ideology stuff, and ultimately it's a rebellion against our Creator. And it demonstrates, and that helps us to see this is hostility to God.
Yeah.
And so number one, we have proper expectations that, hey, you know what? The world and life for believers is going to be filled with controversy. And you got to get used to it. And you keep plugging along and being faithful and looking for those reservoirs of fortitude and strength to keep pushing through. Namely, God's word is one of those sources of strength. But then it also sheds light on our situation, and it helps us to narrate these things for our kids. Like, as you have conversations with your kids about these kinds of controversies, use biblical language. Talk about how these deeds are evil, and this represents mankind, fallen mankind's rebellion and hostility toward their creator, right? Okay, so all that to try and say, yeah, we get it. We get exhausted by the controversy, and I'd love to just sometimes bury my head in the sand, literally in the sand at the beach in Newport, and just surf all day long and not have to worry about these kind of things. But we can't if we're going to be faithful, if we're going to be salt and light in this world. Okay, now to the specific incident, to Target in particular. All right.
And to Target in particular, and the calls for boycotting and that sort of thing.
Okay, so I think there's a lot of people out there with this Target incident who might say, and I think I've heard them say, Target's been doing this for years. They've been celebrating Pride, and why now are we saying, okay, that's it? And doesn't this just represent hypocrisy or
inconsistency?
Or now you're outraged, and so what kind of pushes us over the edge on this one? Because you and I have talked, and we've talked about, we think it's probably time for us to stop shopping at Target. And I guess probably is not the right word. We have decided, we're going to not shop at Target.
I think I stated it when we started talking about it. I said, well, maybe I can just wean myself off of Target.
Yes,
because
you had such a sickness and an addiction.
If you don't shop there, you probably think I sound so dumb. But when a store is one of the main stores you go to, and I am the main shopper in this family. And like I said, there are times where I need clothes for the teenager, present for the kid,
the convenience is great.
It's the convenience thing. So talking about, do we maybe start spending our money somewhere else? It actually was a big deal. I had to really think about, because this will be a big change for me, which you could say that's silly, but it's just the truth. It's not like it was, like some people with the Disney thing, they're like, okay, I'm not going to do that Disney vacation this year. So that's like a once a year thing. Target is like a weekly thing in our lives. So we really had to start thinking about it. So what was it that spurred us? Okay, because we've been shopping there for years, and the Pride display has been there for years now.
Yeah, and now look, we've been watching those things somewhat closely, but not closely where we could tell you, okay, here are all the products that have been, put out year by year by year. But from just kind of living life normally as a human being, but trying to be aware, what seems to push this one over the edge a little bit is that there is a increased targeting of kids on this. And so more prominent displays, more clothing selections, promoting LGBTQ pride. And now what's come onto the radar is items that are helping with social transitioning of kids, which ultimately leads to medical, or can and often leads to medical transitioning.
It certainly encourages that.
Yeah. So I think it's, from our vantage point, it's seeing an increased amount of this activity, in particular, a targeting of younger and younger ages. And then I think the serious nature of what is being promoted, the chest binders, the tuck bathing suits. And there's also been some reports about even who they're hiring to do some of these things. And so there's an artist who's identified himself as a trans Satanist, an actual Satanist, hired by Target. And so there's all of these things together kind of, I think, puts us at a tipping point. And that's, I think with things like this, that's what we want to think about. What are the tipping points for us?
Yeah.
And so those things that I just mentioned kind of have reached this crescendo that we are now reconsidering our actions, our shopping habits. Okay, this leads to the question of boycott. And we've talked about this before, I don't know, it's probably a year ago when we talked the Disney episode. And we won't rehearse that entire discussion, but let's just make some distinctions here, because this is where I think sometimes Christians will hear this word boycott, and we may shy away from it. We may recoil a little bit because boycott has these connotations of people marching in the streets, holding up signs, yelling at, people. And it just, there's I think a real negative kind of connotation that surrounds boycott. And so Christians are like, oh no, I'm not joining a boycott. And boycotts aren't effective anyway, kind of thing.
Yeah.
All right. So we want to make a distinction between, now you could make a distinction between with the word boycott. So let's make a distinction. There are what you might call personal boycotts and public boycotts. And I think oftentimes our minds run to the public kind of boycott. Okay. But boycotting, and you look this up in the dictionary, it just talks about kind of a refusal to participate in or to purchase things.
Yeah.
And it includes both on the personal level or on a public level. Okay. Now, we want to say, number one, on a personal level, okay, if you want to use the word boycott, or if you don't want to use the word boycott, that's fine. But on a personal level, a family level, you can boycott, if you will, a store or a vendor or whoever it might be, simply by not participating in economic transactions with them, right? You just don't go to the store and do business with that company. You don't buy stuff from them. And that is a form of a boycott. That's a personal boycott. And when we feel that a business is acting in immoral ways, now, we'll get to the question of, well, aren't all businesses acting in immoral ways in a second. But look, if you think that a business is acting in an immoral way to such a degree that you no longer want to do business with them, you absolutely have that right, of course, as a citizen, but I think you have that right as a believer as well. You have the freedom to live by your conscience on that. And that is perfectly okay. And you shouldn't feel weird about it. It's actually one of the benefits of the free market. And we don't have a completely free market, but we still have, I think, enough of a free market where you can exercise your rights as a consumer. You can exercise your right as a believer to say, I'm not going to purchase any more goods from Target. And that's no different than saying, hey, that restaurant down the street, well, there's been 7 cases of food poisoning. I don't think I'm going to go there anymore, right? Because of something that's happened. And we'd say, yeah, you're within your rights to do that. And so as believers, we need to feel the freedom to say, no, I'm not going to do business with this company. And also to give others the freedom to exercise their conscience and not to criticize other believers who decide on a personal boycott. And I think this is, this is the idea that we as believers aren't supposed to bind one another's conscience on issues that have to do with the conscience. Okay, now look, if you're going around murdering someone, that's not just a matter of conscience. It's a clear matter of God's moral law. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about on an issue like this, where there doesn't seem to be a clear, definitive moral prescription for anyone or for everyone out there. Like we can't say, yeah, you know what? It is morally, you are morally obligated to personally boycott Target. We can't say that. And so we can't then bind the conscience of other believers. We can argue, give reasons, persuade, try to, give reasons for the views that we have, but at the same time, giving people freedom on this. But I also want to say, look, you can feel the freedom to exercise your conscience on this one.
Yeah, it's what you're describing is difficult, especially if you're someone who like we try to do, think through it well and then make a decision. But I like what you said about it doesn't mean you don't, even if you come to a place where you're okay with other people making their own decisions, which hopefully we are, that you still though should try to persuade people. That's what we're supposed to do, because as Christians we are supposed to use the minds that God gave us to think well about things. And so we should help each other to think well about things. And so this is one of those issues that is just difficult because it requires more in-depth thinking than you're not going to look in scripture and it's going to say, do not do business with a store that promotes these sorts of things. You have to use discretion and wisdom and probably some common sense and things like that.
Yeah, this brings up another issue or an objection people might have with this whole idea of a personal boycott or even a public boycott. But they might say, well, this doesn't seem to be consistent, though. Do you personally boycott every group or every store or every business that you have a moral disagreement with? Okay, so it's the question of consistency. And I would say a couple of things on this one. Number one, our argument certainly isn't that you are obligated to boycott everyone and everything that you have a moral disagreement with. Otherwise, you would have to go. It's impossible. I was just going to try to make up a scenario in my head. Well, I'm
thinking about even since COVID, you and I have tried to make an effort to shop at smaller businesses more, just because COVID was so hard on businesses, especially businesses, in California, where we were locked down for so long. So you think about that on a small, Target's a huge company. They're in the news. They have a website. You think about the little stores in our town that we shop at, and we would have to get to know every store owner and shop and say, well, where do you give money exactly? And what causes do you support? Which of course would be impossible. So I thought about that example.
Yeah. So there's not this kind of in principle argument that says whenever you have a moral disagreement with a business, you must stop shopping there. That's not our view. And so, no, if we decide to boycott Target personally, it doesn't mean that we're inconsistent if we don't also boycott every other business that we have a disagreement with.
Well, because there's a lot. It would be hard, especially in modern day America.
Well, so that's the practical issue.
Yeah.
But just saying on the principle issue, no, there's no inconsistency here. And then you have this additional consideration of, it's also practically impossible. Mm-hmm. You couldn't live in the world.
So you're saying there is... Okay, so you think about a bigger company like Starbucks and Amazon, and they will also do things for Pride Month. Like we know, and even reading in the news, Kohl's is doing stuff. There's all kinds of companies that are going to do stuff in the month of June. So are you and I, if we're going to stop shopping at Target, are you and I going to stop shopping at all of those places? And if not, why?
Yeah.
Is kind of the question.
Yeah, and so this is where I think there are other considerations. So this is why I was saying it's not an in principle argument. Mm-hmm. Okay, so that helps people to see, no, I don't think we're obligated not to do business with pagans or those who are immoral. Mm-hmm. All right, so then what guides us in our thinking on this? Well, I think each person and each family is going to have to kind of work out some of those details for themselves. I think for us, there are several things, several factors that weigh in on this for us and our decision to choose Target, and boycott them. Number one, it would be the serious nature of this moral issue. For us, as we have done work on the issue of gender, and as we have looked at modern gender ideology and the trans movement and what it's doing to young people, what it's doing to our culture, we are seeing the serious nature of this particular issue. And so,
and the serious damage
yeah,
that is being done to young people, but particularly to young people, to teenagers and children.
Yeah. And so I'd put that in. So when I say serious nature, that would include maybe it's denial of God's reality. This is like blatant denial of God's clear reality of what should be self-evident. It has to do with the consequences, the impact, the harm. And so all those things would kind of make up, hey, this thing is a serious issue in the culture. Okay. And also looking at even, hey, where could this lead? Saying, if we don't put a stop here on this issue, then this opens the door for other things. And so we might say, yeah, okay, so this for us is the stopping point. So it's the serious nature of this. It's also, I think, the quantity. So maybe you have a store that has maybe offers a couple of pride shirts, versus a store which now it is prevalent, not just in the clothing, but in the pet supplies, in the food aisles, in home decorations, and on and on and on. So the quantity would be another aspect of it. Now you have this explosion of merchandise and supplies, pride supplies, or all of that is offered all over the store, the website, and so there's the quantity. You could think about the quantity of the messaging, how much messaging now goes into this, and it's just reached this tipping point, okay? And then it's also maybe the prominence of the business. Target is a prominent business. It's a huge business in the US.
I think it's the eighth. I think I read it's the eighth largest company in America.
Yeah, and so strategically, it can be the kind of thing where you'd say, hey, we want to send a large company like that, a powerful company, a message.
And influential. I mean, the influence of Target, just the amount of teenagers that could walk into a Target store and easily buy, for example, that chest binder, and their parents have no knowledge of that. And how their reach is over the entire country, which is different than a mom and pop store in one town or whatever.
Yeah, so that probably goes under quantity too, the quantity of their influence, right? And so seeing all of those factors and saying, hey, a boycott, even if it's just a personal boycott, but if you had enough people together who's all said, hey, on an individual level, we're going to voice our displeasure with Target by not doing business with them, this then maybe offers a kind of cautionary tale to other businesses. And hey, no company out there is too big to do whatever it is they want and to send whatever message it is that they want. And so I think those are the factors that we have been looking at and weighing and saying, okay, so for us, this would be a good reason to stop doing business with this company. And so those would be our reasons. And so therefore, I think what it shows is that we're not being inconsistent on this, okay? Now, there's the other question of, okay, is it effective though? And my answer to that is sometimes. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. I mean, we look at Rosa Parks and the bus boycott back during the civil rights movement. That was effective. There are other times where, maybe the Christian church has done a boycott. It hasn't been effective. But we certainly have an example just in the recent past of a boycott that was kind of a loose boycott. It wasn't like there was some official organizing, but when Bud Light, right, the beer company, decided to have Dylan Mulvaney, a trans individual, trans woman, social media influencer, become a spokesperson for them, and then actually do cans with Dylan Mulvaney's likeness on it, there was a swift reaction from the public, and they stopped purchasing, the public stopped purchasing Bud Light. And they have lost tremendous value in that company. Their sales have plummeted, and that has shown to be an effective boycott in the recent past on this issue. And it could be that we've hit the kind of the tipping point. And this trans issue is now becoming this tipping point where parents and leaders and those in our culture are starting to say, okay, yeah, enough is enough.
Well, I think that reminds me of one thing I've heard, it's, here Christians go again with the Target thing. And instead of seeing it as these companies are ramping up their celebrations, promotions, and endorsements of these things. And so it hasn't been...
When you say these things that are evil.
Right.
Yeah.
So it hasn't been Christians who are knocking down Target stores saying, why aren't you selling Bibles and cross necklaces? It's that Target has, admittedly, they've added merchandise and they've added designers. And so they talk about all these things. And so that's fine. Target can choose to do that. But can't Christians then respond?
Yeah.
And it isn't, so all of that to say, sometimes it's narrated to the culture, these conservative Christians are just looking for another battle, instead of, well, Bud Light is the one who did the can.
Yeah.
They invited a trans person to be the face of their can. And so people have a right to respond to what's done.
Yeah.
And you don't put the blame on the person who's responding instead of the company who's making the move. And then somehow the company's a victim because they did this thing.
Absolutely.
And so that's where I think as Christians, we don't have to say, am I just being like a fuddy-duddy? Am I just looking for another fight? Well, no, things have changed. It's getting more aggressive. And so it's proper that we respond.
Yeah. And I think Christians need to also put this in the context of being salt and light. And you think about the analogies of salt and light. Salt, a preservative, and light, shedding light in the darkness. Well, when Christians expose the dark deeds of evil and deeds that are hostile to God, that is part of being salt and light. Doesn't mean the culture is always going to receive it well or going to be happy about it, but that's part of being a public witness.
Yeah.
As much as being gentle and kind and gracious with your next door neighbor or your coworker, there are times when bearing witness to the truth is part of what it means to be salt and light. Okay, so all that to say, hopefully that gets us thinking about this issue carefully from a biblical worldview. And then I guess just here's the homework for those who are listening. Okay, how does this become a teachable moment for our kids? Right? These cultural moments can be teachable moments. And so a couple just ideas on that.
Yeah. Well, I think even if your kids are 5 and 6 years old, so they're aware of things, I think talking to them about, if you decide not to shop at Target, or if you go into Target and they cannot not see the display, but that you talk to them about it. You say, what is all this rainbow stuff, Mom, or whatever it is. And you say, they're trying to tell kids that they aren't made by God, that they just get to decide who they are. And if they don't like the body God gave them, they should try to change it. And so they're lying to kids, and it's so sad. But having the conversation, even when they're little, and like we did, especially if you have older kids than 5 and 6, that you bring them into the conversation. This happened in the news. This is what Target's doing. Talk to them about it, and then ask what they think and get their input on it.
Yeah, and this is where we go back to the biblical worldview and that framework, the 4 chapters. This is where when you're narrating for your kids and telling them what's going on, you reference chapter 1, God's design, God's creation. Chapter 1 is creation, chapter 2 is the fall. All right, those 2 chapters explain what's going on here. And and use biblical and theological language with your kids to explain this. Hey, here's what Romans 8 says. Man is hostile to God. This is a great example. A tuck bathing suit where a male child can tuck their genitalia to appear as a girl. That is hostility to God and to God's design. He's made them good how they are, and this is a rebellion against that. Isn't that sad? And to narrate it that way. So to at the very least have conversations about this, ask them questions, see where their mindset is at. If you're talking with your teenagers, see what your teenagers think about this, and about the idea of maybe even a boycott. And then if you as a family decide to stop shopping with a certain company, then make sure you talk with your kids about why you're doing that. Help them to see that you have a reason why you are making this decision. It's not just reactionary.
We're not just angry and mad that Target isn't a Christian company promoting Christian values. It's deeper than that.
Yeah. And that our boycotting or our decisions or whatever it might be these are reasonable things, and they're based on the truth of reality, and they're based on the truth of God's word. And so those are just a couple of ideas on how this can be a real teachable moment for our kids. But we've got to be intentional on that. Okay, well, I think we've covered that issue thoroughly. And so the moral of the story is, you people better stop shopping at Target, right? Is that it? No. Okay.
No, it was deeper than that.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, hopefully you feel like you've got some of the tools to think biblically, to think theologically, to think Christianly about a very current situation in our culture. And then that should lead us into our next steps, which is to take action. Maven exists to help the next generation know truth, pursue goodness, and create beauty for the cause of Christ. To find out more, check out maventruth.com.